Hi, Gary here. I am going to walk you through the technique that I used to graft the two ends of the Make the Turn Infinity scarf together. It is grafted in pattern, so it's a little bit different than your typical Kitchener stitch, although there are some similarities. Like I said in the pattern, if having a somewhat visible seam is no big deal to you, I would probably recommend just casting on, maybe cast on in pattern in a 2x2 rib pattern, and then bind off in a 2x2 rib pattern and seam it up using an invisible horizontal seam or a slip stitch crochet join to the inside of the fabric. It's a little more visible, but it is way simpler than doing this way. If you have decided to take the extra spicy route, this is the methodology that I found that I can consistently replicate. There are a lot of videos out there about grafting in pattern. There is a whole process of learning the sort of architecture of the stitches and figuring out how to graft in pattern that quite frankly I want to go back and do, but I was on a time constraint to get this pattern done for this contest, and this is the technique that I found that worked the best. I wouldn't say it's 100% invisible, but I have found that after blocking it does disappear pretty quickly, pretty readily. It was adapted from a video I watched on doing a 1x1 rib and sort of adapted that to 2x2 ribbing. So if you have made it this far and you want to try this out, I'm going to be working on just a little strip of 2x2 ribbed fabric that I made. If this is your first time grafting in pattern, I might recommend not wasting beautiful alpaca silk yarn, but I might recommend taking some other yarn and making a little swatch like this. This is, I think, 14 stitches, so it starts with 2 purls and then ends with 2 purls. And you don't necessarily need to make it this long, but long enough that you can get back around and have your live stitches and your cast on edge from the provisional cast on together. And test this out before you do it on your cowl, because I have found that undoing it, if you've made a mistake along the way, can get tricky and frustrating. So that would be my recommendation. I'm going to start off by just showing you how I did my provisional cast on. I'm sure that any other way works, but this is the way that, again, I've been able to consistently replicate this. So let's take a look.
So the prime point of this video will be to show you how I have grafted the ends of the Make the Turn Infinity scarf together in pattern. But in order to get to that point, we need to start with a provisional cast on. There are many ways to do provisional cast ons. I, for this project, have chosen to do a crocheted one, which seems to work well and is the way that I've just consistently done it to get the grafting piece to work. So I've stuck with it. But I think you could probably use any method that you prefer. For this method, you're going to take a piece of waste yarn. Here I'm using a slightly lighter weight than the yarn that we're using the pattern, but I don't think it really matters that much. You'll make a slip knot and put that onto your crochet hook. Again, I've got roughly the same size crochet hook as I do my working needles, but it's not that critical here. To do the provisional cast on, take your crochet hook with the slip knot on it, place the yarn behind the needle that you're going to be casting on the stitches to, and then just hook your yarn and pull the loop through, putting that first loop on the needle. Then you're going to take the yarn back around, pull another loop through that slip knot or through the loop on the crochet hook. That's 2. Again, just pull a loop through, and you're going to do this for as many stitches as you need for your cast on. For the Make the Turn Infinity scarf, that's going to be 34, unless you're doing a built-in I-cord, in which case it would be 40. I'm only going to do about 14 or so here, just to get enough stitches to set up a pattern and make a teeny tiny little loop of fabric that I can then show you how to graft the ends together. So here we have 2, 4, 6, 7. So I'll do 7 more. But when you finish, you get the number of stitches that you need. What I like to do is take a little locking stitch marker and put it through that loop. I don't have one right here, but just to hold it, you could just pull the yarn through and make a little knot, but that's just one knot you're going to have to deal with at the end. And this way, it's a little easier to pop it off when you go to unwind the provisional cast on. And then you just take your regular working yarn and start knitting as per the pattern. In this case, you are going to knit that first row straight across. It's just going to make it a little easier to undo the provisional cast on when you get to the end. One thing to note is I would leave a bit of a longer tail than maybe you are used to here at the front end here, because you're going to need that to basically make a stitch at the end, but I'll get to that. So just knit across and then continue the pattern, and I will see you on the other side when I have a little swatch to show you how to graft.
Okay, well, I have my swatch here that I worked on after I did my provisional cast on. You see I found my locking stitch marker there for it. Oops, my yarn is stuck here, sorry. And I worked, I don't know what this is, 6 inches or so. Just really wanted enough to be able to loop it around and not have it too tight. And what we are going to do is first take out the provisional cast on, get those cast on stitches onto a needle, and then we're going to start working them together. I'm going to be doing it on a double pointed needle. Obviously you're going to have a wider fabric than I have here, and so you're probably not going to fit it all on a normal double pointed needle. So you could use the other end of your circular needles if you're working on circular needles, or get another set of circular needles to work on. It might be helpful to do it in a slightly smaller size, just for taking out the provisional cast on, but I'm going to use I'm using the same size needle here. So this is the right hand side. You can see because we're starting with the two pearl stitches, and so we're basically just going to turn this over here, turn this around, and we're going to begin. As I mentioned, you should have left a decent sized tail here. This is probably a little on the short side, but it will work for purposes, because basically this is a half stitch. This is where the sort of philosophy or the architecture of these stitches kind of gets lost on me, because you don't have exactly whole stitches all the way across. You have these transitions between the knits and the purls that kind of act as half stitches, and this is one of those. So you're going to want to preserve that little loop here by taking the tail of your yarn. And I should have mentioned up front, you're going to need a tapestry needle, but you probably knew that if you're grafting. And you thread that, and then hopefully you'll have a little bit longer tail than I do to work with, but I just thread that down into the fabric to create a loop or a little stitch there. Probably should have gone onto the outside of that, but anyway, that's going to be the first one that you get on your needle. So let's undo the stitch marker here, and we're just going to slowly start picking up the stitches and undoing the provisional cast on. Now, if you've used a provisional cast on in other things before, and you're used to just unzipping it, that is not going to happen in this case. It's going to be a little bit easier because you knit that first row. You didn't try to do it in pattern, so it'll be a little bit easier, but it's not one of those where you just kind of pull it and it pops out. So let's pop that off, and as I said, I should have probably put that loop on the other way, but let's get that waste yarn out of there. And that'll be the first one, and we want to kind of go back to front, I think, on all of these, although it's probably not super critical. And then you're just going to go through and find all of the legs of these stitches. So anytime the waist yarn comes through, you're going to pick that up and then pop that off and pull the waist yarn through. Some will be easier depending on the direction of things than others, but there's the next one. And I just pop the top off and then pull the yarn through. Again, it is a little slow and tedious of a process to get this done, but you want to make sure you get them all. And probably could use my tapestry needle. Okay. Next one, and you can just do them all at once and then undo the that may be the faster way to do it, undo the waist yarn in bigger chunks. You could also just cut the waist yarn and then start pulling it on bits and pieces, but I'm going to try to keep it intact here. Pick up a couple more. And what you're going to want to do, maybe I'll try to pick them all up here and then go back and do that off camera, is the important thing here is you're going to end up with one more, get that on the wrong way. You're going to end up with one more stitch on your back needle. So this cast on row is going to be at the back, and the final row, the underworking needle, is going to be at the front. So you're going to want to make sure there's this little half kind of stitch here at the end that you're going to want to pick up as well, and hopefully when we count them there will be one more. So I think, as I mentioned, I had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So hopefully 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. So you should have one more on the back needle than you do on the front needle. Now, I will tell you that sometimes I've gone through this whole process, and even with preserving that little loop at the front, I've ended up with 14. Or the same number as I've had on the front, and you do definitely need one more. And so what I will do in that case is I will just kind of dip down in here and pick up an extra loop. But I think if you're careful, it's usually towards here at the end where it gets a little tricky in terms of making sure you're picking up every time somewhere has gone through the waist yarn, and that little half loop at the end, which is kind of a half stitch, is usually where the trick is, which is why I just pick one up at the end of there. So I'm going to pull out the rest of this waist yarn and come back when we are ready to graft.
Okay, we are back and we have removed the waist yarn. You'll see here is that tail that was tucked down there to create that first little partial stitch, and then we have the 15 or one more than we have on our live or the last row that we worked on the stitch on the pattern. you will need to cut a tail that is, I think, approximately 3 times the length of what you're going to be grafting. I left a lot extra here. You don't want to run out for sure. And we're going to put that on our tapestry needle. And then we're going to want to make sure we have the right side facing us. So this is the right side here, but we're going to be working from, this is going to again be our front needle is the last row that you actually worked on the pattern, and the back needle is going to be from the provisional cast on. So we're going to end up flipping it around this way. So here we have the 2 purl stitches and our working yarn, grafting yarn, and then the back stitches from the provisional cast on. Here's that little loop, so it's switch sides. And this does not, unlike the Kitchener stitch, this does not require a setup row. Now, if you take a look at the instructions that are going to be printed down below, you will say to me, well, yes, if you just did the first few stitches and counted that as a setup row, then you'd be back in a situation that is very familiar. If you've done the Kitchener stitch, you'd be in a way to set up a pattern that's very similar to the Kitchener stitch. That is true, but I think it is most helpful to kind of separate these. I found myself getting, falling back on and thinking about the Kitchener stitch when I was doing this. And I think by working it, setting it up so there is no setup row, and then working it in a different pattern order, that it keeps it distinct in your mind, or at least it did in my mind. And so that's how I'm going to explain it to you here. The pattern, and I think as at least for me on the Kitchener stitch, it is very important to never stop midway through the repeat, but the pattern repeat in this case is going to start and finish on this first stitch on the front needle. So the order you are going to work them in is 1, 2, 3, and then back to the front needle 4. And I think the other reason that this thinking about it in this 1, 2, 3, 4 pattern is helpful is because it does set up a very helpful, it's not really mnemonic device, but it is a repetition that is easy for me to remember. And then you have the direction that the stitches are going to be worked, i.e. either as a knit, as a purl, and then whether they come off or stay on the needle. So let me walk you through that. So whether it stays on or off the needle, that is going to remain the same regardless of what stitch you are faced with. And you're always going to worry about what you are faced with on the front needle. So in this case, starting with a purl, so it's going to be purl, purl, knit, knit. So whatever stitch is facing you on the front needle is going to determine how the stitches are worked in terms of whether they're knit or purl. But the on and off of the needles is always going to stay the same. So it's always going to be leave on, take off, leave on, and then back to the front, the first stitch you worked, and take that off. And then how those are worked is going to be based on the first stitch. So the thing to remember is it's always going to be starting with the opposite of what you are seeing on the needle. So it's a purl, so that means it's always going to be starting, if you see a purl, it's always going to start with a knit. So it's going to be knit and leave this one on. And then it is for a knit, so for a purl stitch in the front, it's knit, knit, purl, purl. So knit the first stitch, and then knit this first one on the back needle, That one is going to come off. And then, so that was knit, knit, and now it's going to be purl, purl. So purl the second stitch on the back needle, and then you're back to the front, and that one's going to be a purl, and you're going to take it off. And don't worry about too much. I mean, the tension is going to kind of work itself out with blocking, but you don't want it to be too tight to tie it in there. So again, we're faced with a purl stitch on the front, so that means we know it's going to be knit, knit, purl, purl. First one stays on, so knit, and then knit off, purl stays on, and then back to the front, and purl off. Okay, so we've got the first two stitches there. Then we are faced with a knit stitch, and that is just going to be the reverse. So it's going to be purl, purl, knit, knit. So first one is purl, stay on, purl off, knit on, and then back to the front to the original stitch and knit that one off. Oops. Try not to lose your needle in the process. Knit off. Okay. Sorry about that. I got interrupted. We were on a knit stitch, and so I finished it up and moved ahead and through the next two purl stitches. So we're back on a knit stitch. I thought I'd finish that up. So it is a knit stitch, so it's going to be purl, purl, knit, knit. So purl off, purl on, sorry, purl off, knit on, then back to the first stitch, knit off. And then we're on to our second knit stitch. So purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl off, knit on, knit off, and then we are back to purls. So knit, knit, purl, purl. So knit on, knit off, purl on, purl off, second purl stitch. So knit, knit, purl, purl, knit on, knit off, purl on, purl off. I'm going to finish up these last four stitches off camera, and then I will show you what we've got at the end. Sorry for not finishing that on screen, but I could tell the dog was about to go ballistic. And so anyway, here is where we have ended up. You can go back through if you need to and sort of adjust some tension. I've found that just kind of stretching it out a little bit here pulls everything into place. And there is your graft. Again, you know, you can kind of see in there where it happens, so it's not 100% invisible, but with blocking, as I've said, and having the pattern more than just the 2x2 rib pattern, eventually it does sort of blend in very nicely. So I think that is a nice finish. I hope that has been helpful. as always, DM me if you have any questions about this technique. I'll put all the instructions written out down below. Thanks.
So I hope you found that helpful. If you did decide to do the grafting technique, I hope you found that little tutorial helpful. It can be a little tricky, and I think because many of us are used to Kitchener stitch, keeping another order and everything in your head is can be a little tricky. But if you just take the written instructions and kind of have that in front of you, go slowly, it should work out well. Again, if you decide to do this, I would probably recommend taking a little time and doing a swatch and testing it out once before you do it on your infinity scarf. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always email me at GaryKnits, GaryRides @gmail.com. Thanks.